Happy 2026, Diva family, and welcome to episode 29 of Psychedelic Divas. Before we dive in, I want to thank everyone who has listened, provided support, shared, rated, reviewed, or just sent good vibes over the last year. Even though I've barely promoted it, the podcast is somehow growing and finding its voice and audience. It is now in the top 5% of all podcasts, which surprises me more than anyone. So thank you for all of that. This podcast doesn't happen without you, and of course, my fabulous producer, Sonia Flores. In this episode, we're going to get political. But don't worry, it's the best kind of politics psychedelic politics. My guest is Andrea Romero, the state representative for House District 46 in New Mexico. I met Andrea at a psychedelic conference called the Enchanted State in Santa Fe, New Mexico. She was one of the speakers, and I was so impressed with what she had to say. I sought her out at the after party, and we had some fun dishing about the conference and what it took to bring successful psychedelic legislation to New Mexico. So let me read you her formal bio before we dive in. Andrea Romero is a native New Mexican, a graduate of Stanford University with a BA in political science and the University of New Mexico School of Law. She serves as the state representative for House District 46. She has long championed the economic, environmental, and cultural vitality of her region through public service, business leadership, and community engagement. Her work spans place-based impact investing, policy innovation, and sustainable entrepreneurship. As an entrepreneur, Andrea focuses on food systems and biotechnology, holding a U.S. and EU patent for probiotic-enriched eggs that supports gut health and reduces food waste. Welcome to Psychedelic Divas, Andrea. I so appreciate you making time out of your very full schedule.
Thanks, Carla. It's so awesome to be here. So great to reconnect with you. And Santa Fe was just such a transformative experience, getting folks in the room and being around such kindred spirits and support for, I think, the future of healthcare in New Mexico.
Well, I want to address that because I wanted to say that you have many important priorities for New Mexico. Like on your website, there's smarter economic development, clean and safe drinking water, community health programs. So we're going to focus on psychedelics here, but I want to acknowledge that you're fighting for many important causes for the people of New Mexico.
Oh, thanks, Carla. And I feel like they're all intertwined. We'll talk a little bit about that. So yeah, I love
I
that.
think they can be. All right, so
Totally.
let's talk psychedelics. Earlier this year, New Mexico became the third state to pass a law to decriminalize psilocybin, or magic mushrooms. SB 219 has been hailed as the best of the three state bills. So the other two states were Oregon and Colorado. And SB 219 decriminalizes psilocybin for treatment of major treatment-resistant depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, substance use disorders, and end-of-life care. So, to be clear, this is all great news, but the first patients probably won't receive treatment until 2028, so things are just getting rolling. But this was a bipartisan bill that was introduced, and when it was introduced, you said, psilocybin research is revolutionizing mental health care, offering hope to patients battling depression, PTSD, and anxiety. With this legislation, New Mexico is leading the charge in treatment innovation, setting a powerful precedent for compassionate and science-backed care. So my question is, tell us a little bit about how SB 219 was conceived, how it got passed, and what New Mexico learned from Oregon and Colorado in the process.
Yeah, thanks for that. Such a thorough intro on the what we've done. And actually we're a year ahead of schedule. So folks are actually poised to get treatment in 2027. So we've been so quick to the rulemaking process, getting through all of the technicalities. We gave ourselves a big buffer saying, this is the end date that you have, but we're a year ahead of schedule. So by the end of 2026, we'll be doing our rollout for 27. So very excited about that, which is just a testament to all the incredible people that were involved in SB 219, which started as an idea for my colleagues in the Senate that said, let's do this as a study first. Let's take a year, Let's really study this. Let's talk to the folks in government. Let's do a little testing on the waters and how are people feeling about this? What's the reception like? And so we took that year, essentially looked from all the different forms of government between the stuff that had already gone into play in Colorado, Oregon, learned from our, sister states in what may have been missteps that we had perceived and where we really need to go with it. So we worked with government, we worked with experts in the field. We were essentially trying to inform the policy that was what we finally ended up with. And the bipartisanship with it for me was really a lesson in where we are, both as a state and as a nation, in the psychedelic space, where in states like New Mexico, and I think across the country, where we've seen such harm done to our societies when it comes to addiction, PTSD, mental health needs, and not being able to meet those needs, we have been absolutely desperate for answers. And when you see the potential that psychedelics both have, and we know, not just the potential, but the knowledge of so many people who have gone of their own volition to other countries, to other places to be able to seek out this care, it's embodied in the stories that we all know so well. And so how can you challenge that and say, I'll do nothing, right? No, we're just not ready for this. I think there's just such an appetite for that. And certainly through SB 219, that was the case in the chambers of the New Mexico legislature. Both chambers just absolutely resonated with the healing that folks were talking about from all walks of life. And so I was too surprised how open and excited the reception was for bringing this to New Mexico. The real innovation that we experienced, I think, from other states that have done this in the past is that we began with the fact that we know that we're in a state that, wants to provide healthcare to all. Being a state that has a lot of folks on Medicaid, Medicare, we have an aging population. We wanted this to be available to all those who wanted to seek it out, in which case that means we knew the funding had to be equitable. And so we are the first state, which is now, I think, the sort of barometer that we've risen across the country, the first state to have an equity fund for folks to be able to access this form of care. We knew, at least status quo today across the country, is for those who tend to gravitate toward psychedelics or those who can afford it, are those who can receive it. And that's just something, that we just could not imagine being the sort of stakes in New Mexico. And so we basically said, like other forms of healthcare, this needs to be available to everybody. And so this is the first fund of its kind for this type of care in the world that we know of, and certainly in the United States. And so, both from the medical standpoint, we just wanted to make sure, and through this last year, because of the standards that we know exist in other states, we've been able to keep those safety standards, medical standards, and learn from those, and then of course provide the funding available for those to access it. So really the sort of compilation of what we think is the best that we understood from other states in providing a medical program in the state.
Well, not to throw Oregon or Colorado under the bus, but do you think there were missteps in some of the other programs?
I think we were really grateful to those states for taking the leap, and Colorado has been a real leader, and Oregon as well, in looking to these opportunities that other states have not yet. And so I think I wouldn't say missteps, because in all policy, we always have to go back and fix something that we did not know or did not understand fully at the time. And you're just reading the hard language. Some of it is like, we have all these ideas, but how do you make sure that it fits in the law? And that translation sometimes just needs to take a few years to get right. And we go back to the drawing board all the time. But I think Oregon more so, with the full legalization, recreational, et cetera, we were just not ready to do that. I think in the
Well,
the
and
way
they
in
they
which
backpedaled on it also.
that's true. That's
So
true.
they
And I
they
think
felt it was a misstep.
Agreed. And so I think for us, that was just a bridge too far for, a rollout that we wanted to be really controlled and managed, and understood well, longitudinally before we got into a whole society doing a recreational approach. So I think the appetite for that really made us a leader in understanding ourselves as well. Again, why the bipartisanship, why the safety, why the needs to be able to understand where we're going with this. And I think very thoughtful in the way of that rollout.
Well, so I'm curious, was there a decision process? What was the decision process around just psilocybin? Because it could have been
Yep.
plant medicine, it could have
Yep.
been also ayahuasca or San Pedro, or
Yep.
what was the thought process of limiting what the substance was?
I think because at this point, we know so much about psilocybin, right? Like 30 years of study and really in a safer space. We know enough now about whole mushroom research, what we wanted to be able to cultivate, being an agricultural state as well. How are we going to protect the cultivation? How are we going to look at that? I don't know enough about ayahuasca cultivation. I mean, there's just a space of knowledge that I think we feel really comfortable with at this point in time. I think the opening for then trying to bring in other plant medicine is really the opportunity now and moving forward. And as we're continuing to learn, I think again the knowledge base, and I think just pop culture in a lot of ways, knowledge base that, where you have Netflix playing shows about healing, and it's very accessible to folks to kind of grapple with psilocybin. I've actually heard about that. We've heard a lot about mushrooms these days, versus some of the other plant medicine that I think we're going to continue to learn about again in pop culture, that it's not in the underground. It's really in the halls of our legislatures these days. So I think that real bright spot in just where the culture and understanding has been and where it's continued to go about growing that knowledge base even further. And again, I think the research really, really shines through when folks are looking for the right answers. And so yeah, I think the reception is just the culmination of all of that.
Well, that makes total sense. So, all right, it can be a tricky question to ask a state legislator if you've broken the law. So, but of course, I have to ask, do you have a personal history with psychedelics that helped shape your advocacy of this bill?
Not so much my personal use. I don't have a history of this. As we sort of touched on to begin with, I was part of my parents' generation in the boomer era of just absolute fear of drugs. Drugs, like as
Wait, no,
a
wait,
high
no,
school.
no. The
Yeah.
boomers, the
Yeah.
boomers did the drugs.
True. My parents, however, I would say their parents coming from
Their parents.
history,
That's the
their
great
parents coming from
generation.
the
The
great
boomers
generation.
were the
Yeah.
boomers were like,
No, fair.
"Hey, check this stuff out."
True. And I did. So I've told this story. I got to legalize cannabis in our state. I was part of that work. And my family jokes like, if you don't like the rules, you go and change them, Dre. Like, that's how you approach these topics, where if you think something's unfair or unjust, or you just go and fix it, to be the thing. And we grew up in Santa Fe. I mean, Santa Fe, again, the host of the Enchanted State, a place where has always been alternative cultures, ideas, just a real just kaleidoscope of just people and just the inviting of that in. And so, I grew up in that culture where I knew of folks doing psychedelics, but I didn't like for us, it was just this very much like, do not do that. You will ruin your brain. You will ruin your life. It's like, this is a total like abolitionist mindset. And I think too, because of,
I was raised with that.
and we knew of people that had, and I told the story about when we were legalizing cannabis, that there was a culture of people that knew about the medicine, that I had relatives that were secretly growing cannabis in Taos to help my great grandfather or great great grandfather bathe in the healing waters of cannabis, being he had bone cancer. And they told this story, but they were so terrified of the neighbors telling the police about this that they pulled it all out and put it underneath the outhouse, because they were just like, we can't have this. We just can't. the risks involved in even doing something so profoundly healing and important to the knowledge base of plant medicine, and using so many different forms of plant medicine in northern New Mexico, which is just such a culture unto itself. And knowledge base unto itself. There was a huge sort of like upbringing of, you just don't even touch it because they're going to put you in jail, and it was just like
Yeah.
terrifying, right? So I have not had a real psychedelic journey myself, but know again of the healing, and trust the people when they tell you that their lives have been transformed. I'm really excited about New Mexico and the cultural context that I know that it will bring in having that healing available. And I feel like as soon as it opens up, like I'll be like the one being like, I gotta be able to give the testimony, the 5-star, review, in order to be able to myself be part of that entree into a new form of healthcare and healing in the state.
Well, you're touching on this a little bit, but I am curious. So it was part personal experience, part what you witnessed in the community, but I'm also hearing kind of just a trust in the cultural knowing, or that you said that your family is like, Andrea, you're if it's not fair, if it's not right, you're going to go fix it, and so you're obviously in the right job. But what was in that in your upbringing, and that I know that it was just say no with the drugs, but there's something about the way that you were brought up that's this challenging personality to like, this doesn't feel right or this needs to be fixed. What's Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I was in high school after 9/11, like very formative experience for me in trying to understand and grapple with the world at that time. And, there was just so much that I felt like I didn't know, and immediately was like, I need to get to know the world. What are all these things that are happening and affecting us that I know nothing about? I was definitely in like a bubble as a kid. And even my parents, when I'm like, what is this? And why is this happening? They're like, I don't know. So good luck with that. Like, we'll support whatever knowledge journey you want to be on. And I think that's how it has been in the understanding the war on drugs. And that truly was a war that played out, that I feel like in New Mexico, and certainly in our community, when we've been dealing with an opioid epidemic since I was a kid. And I didn't know that we were at the front lines of that in northern New Mexico, in Chimayo and Espanola, and in the northern part of our state, where we had very heavy, drug use, heroin being the drug of choice when I was a kid, now moving into fentanyl, that is still happening so strongly in our community. And it was just like whispers, all of the like, people are sick and they're suffering, but we don't really talk about it. We don't really bring it out into everyday life, that folks are self-medicating and finding ways in which to deal with trauma, deal with severe amounts of life happening. And that was really what we were coping with. And just the absolute devastation that was happening to not only our family, because we are 0 degrees of separation away from this epidemic. I've lost so many people in my life and in our community to these forms of addiction that have had no responses, that have had insufficient ways of addressing, truly the huge amount of need in our community to help folks. And so for me, this is just a sense of responsibility to so much of that, but also I think a sense of justice and real focus on real solutions rather than condemning the folks that have already just had such difficulty in trying to address and find the solutions for their own well-being.
Well, I want to just read a little bit about the speech that you shared at the Enchanted State conference. You spoke to that. You said, before I became a state representative, I was just a gal in our community, ravaged by opioids, watching my cousins, my friends, my loved ones suffer. And I can tell by just your emotional response to talking about that, that has impacted you personally and obviously as a legislator. Can you tell us like how does that show up? It's in this bill, obviously, but how does that show up in your work as a legislator?
Yeah, I think that sense of real understanding and pain in our community, and how these concentric circles where it's not just the person perhaps in the state of addiction or despair or where they are and how they're meeting the need of that despair. It's how it affects so many people around them, and if these result in tragedy, the struggle is real in an ongoing sort of situation where folks are dealing with addiction, dealing with trauma, dealing with PTSD, mental health needs, and not getting the support that they need, right? So that's just so real in so many of our existences. And then if, as those play out and as these things hopefully find resolve or healing, and there are so many great stories of that in the ways in which folks have been able to navigate that. But the impact of the tragedy that I have seen in our community, that's the generational trauma that exists, right? That's where you're going, what can we do really to address this? And when you have a solution like psychedelics that I think can be transformative in not only shifting a culture of thinking around something that was, again, so prohibitive, so just we do not touch anything that is in a realm of whatever the government says not to do. We're going to try our best, and keep it that way. That this is just too important to ignore, and in a place where we are so desperate for that way of helping us live our lives in the best possible ways. And for me, this is just a real moment that, if we have political support, if we have all of these things, we have to counter this culture in the most profound way to meet the moment of the needs that we have in our society today.
Hey, fellow explorers. Thoughtful planning and preparation is the foundation of any successful psychedelic journey. And if something does go wrong, knowing how to navigate that difficult space is essential. That's why I wrote my psychedelic safety guide, including what to do when things go wrong. It's filled with tips and tools for keeping you and your friends as safe as possible. You'll find it at our website, psychedelicdivas.com. Please go get it, read it, and share it. The more we all know, the safer we can keep each other. Thanks.
You just said it so eloquently here, and you said it very eloquently in your speech, which you were kind enough to share with me. So I want to just speak your words back to you. So you say generationally, we've harbored so many atrocities from the three colonial histories. And then you talked about how many New Mexican generational families like your own still carry trauma from this in our bodies, and so many of us have not yet removed it from our lives. We seek out self healing, with many retreating to drugs and alcohol, only to never escape the ravages of ourselves, our own minds, our own bodies. And then you say, psilocybin treatment breathes new light and hope into those who have sought but never found solace. And it's such beautiful words that I wanted to make sure that I shared them here, even though you've just spoken to that. And you started to talk a little bit about your hope for this, but I want to keep talking about what is your communal hope and prayer for this work. So how do you envision it being used to heal both individually and communally?
Yeah, the amazing thing about New Mexico and the culture of people that I get to live with every day is that it's a come as you are place. And all of the brokenness and ugliness and things that we're trying to hide from ourselves and from others is just really on our sleeves, and is what makes us just such a beautiful place to be, and what has brought so many to the state in that invitation to be like, come, we love you, we'll embrace you. And it's a place of healing in that. I think why there's so many artists, so many poets, writer, I mean, just every form of healing that you could potentially have, the mountains, the desert, the healing waters of, the mineral pools, the spas, all of this wellness culture that we're seeing now, now at the forefront has always been part of the Santa Fe experience and certainly the New Mexico experience. And I think the vision for this is to really see healthcare, forms of self-care. We're hearing this language more and more often in popular culture. How is that a way of life? How do you approach these opportunities and ways in which we live better, in the ways that we live to become our best selves. And I have always seen that in the folks that both struggle, and we're all struggling in some way, shape, or form, right? So, but how we find that sense of healing. And for me, this is a real embodiment of pulling together all of these different components of how art heals, how nature heals, how our healers are healing folks, how do doctors and nurses and the practice of this start becoming one thing. And in a way, I feel like we've already been doing that, right? New Mexico is just that invitation to find that way. But how do we actually make this an available practice and opportunity for everybody, accessible to all of those? Like if you want to drink your kombucha and yoga, like do your yoga practice and also have do your psychedelic medicine. Like, how is that accessible to all in a form that feels like we can all enjoy that, share that, and really cultivate that as a community. And I think this is just the way in which this healing economy or healing space finds a way to shift the culture of what we grew up with, which was you do not go to the doctor unless you are bleeding and dying, right? Like that's just how we saw healthcare. And so you take care of yourself. And if you're suffering, maybe just don't talk about it. And so it's how do we shift that to where that self-care and form of life is really just living?
So you talk about you just mentioned the healing economy, and you spoke about it in your speech, and I just love that concept of a healing economy instead of everything else being so capitalist focused and driven. And so I'm curious when we talk about healing at a policy level,
Yeah.
whose definition of healing are we using? And were there teaching from elders or indigenous leaders or other wisdom keepers that informed those policy decisions where we were going to start talking about a healing economy?
Yeah, yes. And, the definitions piece we have not put into statute. So I can't
Right,
say
right. I
I
understand,
definitively
but it
know
seems to be part of
that.
the conversation. Yes.
Totally. And I think it has been. And I think that's part of when we've continued to see, and the simple side of this is like the integration of when we look at what we still consider like homeopathic or remedies, such as things that we again know that work, such as acupuncture, right? We've been able to move into a place of how do you get that covered by your insurance companies? Let's just work on the technicalities here. And the same thing goes. If yoga is healing you, if your breathing practice or how do we encourage that? And we've seen that again through insurance programs. Like if you're doing your 10,000 steps a day, we're going to give you, $10 off your monthly, subscription to this. So that's, I think, in how we start seeing as policymakers a way to create the framework for healing, right? The technicalities for how to make that make sense and invite that way of being able to show the society these are all acceptable forms of payment again in this very capitalist structure, how do we form into what currently exists to also help change that and change the paradigm of what does healing look like? It is when you break your leg and you need emergency services, but it's also when your heart is broken and what does that look like? And you need support that you need that may not be obvious on the outside, but how do you find those forms of care that you need on the inside? And that's, I think, what we've been grappling with from talking about mental health, when talking about all these forms of violence that we're dealing with in our communities, and violence in all of those shapes, right? Physical violence to emotional, and dealing with we're having to navigate these things by understanding the science, understanding the culture, understanding the mechanisms, and then finding the ways with which we can find the access points to that healing. And again, it's in the food you eat, it's in the media you consume, and it's in all of these different forms. But how do we incentivize what we understand to be the best forms of care that are available? And those can be tricky and take generations to figure out. And, we're here we are
May they not
yeah.
continue to take generations to figure
Gosh, I
out.
hope so. I really hope so. Can't AI like get that together these days? But yeah, we want to do the very best for what we can understand and articulate how to build into these systems that have been so rigidly formed in our impossible to dismantle in many ways. But if we can reshape them in the image of what we know to be true and to be helpful, we're gonna try.
So, to be clear, will people be able to run psilocybin services through their insurance?
So that's the goal, right? Is to be, again, when we talk about funding and equity availability, is what systems already, exist to provide that resource. And so, yes, the idea is to fit it into all of these forms. And at a certain point, and we just saw the rescheduling of cannabis. At some point, this will be rescheduled, and we will just be in a form of healthcare that hopefully exists. Again, that's the that's the
Well,
vision.
to be
Yeah,
clear, President Trump had issued an executive order that
right.
cannabis should be rescheduled. It is still technically Schedule
Has
One,
not been. Yeah.
which means it's on the same level. The DEA treats it on the same level as heroin, as having no medical use and highly addictive. So just to
Yeah.
be clear,
Little
like,
technicality there.
right. Still nothing. People were like, "Aren't psychedelics?" Everyone thinks psychedelics are legal now because everybody's doing them. I'm like, nope, they
Nope.
are. Technically, on a federal level, everything is still, including cannabis, still 100% illegal. And yet
And that's just it. Yeah.
we're working around the systems.
And that's our job as states, is to show folks that you can do this safely, and that there's, here are the risks, but here are all the benefits. And I think when we come to that place, we've set this up to be Medicaid funded. At some point, the federal government should be paying for your healthcare. And that's just what it is. It's just it's a form of care that you should be getting. And I feel the same way about a gym membership, like
Well,
the government
is
should
that
be paying for
something the
that.
government should pay for that? But I'm curious. In Oregon or Colorado, are either of those states getting Medicaid funding or
No,
any
no,
sort of federal funding for this? No.
no, we wouldn't
Okay.
either. No, we wouldn't
Right.
either.
Okay. It's a hope.
No.
It's a dream.
But setting it up for that success is
Yes.
what we've been doing, and why we have this funding available, but we're setting it up to be Medicaid reimbursable someday. That's where we're saying, let's be so much into where we see this going that we can help inform how
Right.
this would work.
Got it.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And that is what it takes, right? And
Yeah.
the states are, well, I actually can't remember when California legalized marijuana, 2008 maybe?
It was a while
Um,
ago. Yeah.
but it was definitely a while ago, and yet we're still on a state by state basis. And as I said, even with this new move by Trump to change the scheduling of it, it hasn't changed. But we have come a long way. There's a long way to go, and you are doing the very good on the ground work to make that happen. So I want to thank you for that. You've been described as bringing a different kind of leadership to this issue. So my question is, how do intuition, empathy, or feminine wisdom show up in how you
Mm.
legislate?
Such an awesome question. And I think these are the walks of life that we hope. And for me, just, being a student of democracy and of different forms of government, ways of trying to understand systems of governance from a very, academic standpoint, but how you understand a community and yourself and your place in that community and being a leader, I say that in quotes because I personally just did not know that was leadership. What you just being able to understand that your form of life and having this conversation is leadership. And when you know something needs to change or you feel very strongly about how things need to go, for me, I've been that sort of like my family will tell you that I just like can't let it go. I have to go figure it out. And so here we are today, wanting to make that make sense for myself and doing all I can to really shift the conversation in that way. And I think, having that heart space and coming from a family of what would be matriarchs, but never acknowledged as such, in the sense of the patriarchy, right? Like a very we listen to the men, but actually the women are doing everything. But I joke about that because I have two brothers and I'm the middle child, and we're all very, very strong-willed. But again, being like that energy and space of being I can hang with like whoever it is, and take up space in those ways is just finding your voice, I think, in a place where we have had such a long and storied history on the matriarchy, and me being a student that has been late to even psychedelics, to a lot of our history and shape shifting in New Mexico, as an adult, really learning where I come from, and then finding these forms of wisdom that have always existed in our society, but viewing that as wisdom, and how to continue to bring light to the things that have always existed, but in a place where, your voice matters. The things that you've experienced, the challenges that you faced are resonant with so many people because you live here, because you're from here, because you get it. And I didn't see that as a point of both wisdom and leadership to begin with. But as you see yourself in these spaces, and as I've now understood after years of working in politics, that is immensely important, that's actually why those things make sense. That's why it's working, because folks really get what you're bringing, and it resonates. And I really do, without that lived experience, could not have, I think, been as both influential and successful in the political realm without that.
I love that. That's beautiful. So it doesn't sound like your family is surprised that you ended up being a lawyer and a politician. But I'm just curious, when you were a little kid, what did you think you were going to be when you grew up?
My first aspiration was to be a B-girl. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Nope.
So these are breakdancing women
Okay.
who do like backup dancing. They're in all the music videos.
Uh-huh.
Growing up, they were my that's who I wanted to be. I
Wow,
was
I
like, I
love
want to
it.
be cool.
That's
I
great.
want to wear those cool clothes. I want to be part of this music.
Uh-huh.
So it was my first aspiration. And then a VJ. I don't know if you remember the MTV
Uh-huh.
era,
Yeah,
the video
definitely.
jockeys. Like
Uh-huh.
I want to be a talking head personality. Maybe I'll do Sally Jesse Raphael type stuff, like
Uh-huh.
talk show host. Somehow that translates into the political realm. Did not at all end up there. By the time I was starting, I was like, I will never be in politics. I could never. This is awful. It sounds terrible. And who would do this to themselves? So none of my family has ever worked in politics ever. Did not come from a family that was politically active at all. So I just am like a total, just like black sheep in the fam of, we got to get out there. We got to do these things. They're just like, whoa. And so it's been a really fun journey for me to bring, I think, so many folks into that fold that never saw themselves in these
Yeah.
spaces either. And
Yeah.
so, and that's how we do it. We just keep rolling with it. But it was not necessarily for me at all. I did not grow up in that space. I'm just constantly doing weird things, from ostrich farming to probiotic work to
Yeah,
politics
you
and
have an
lawyering.
egg.
So
I was just telling in your bio, you have an egg patent. But before I want to go there in a second,
yeah,
but I
yeah.
just want to say I don't think you're the black sheep. I think you can join me. I call myself the psychedelic sheep in my family because I was a good girl. The black sheep are
Yeah.
they're the bad boys and bad girls, and I was a good girl, but definitely the odd one out. So psychedelic
Love
sheep, you
that.
can join me in that if you want.
Oh,
You
that's
can
the
be whatever
perfect sheep. Yes. I
whatever
think
kind of
that's the
sheep you want to
perfect
be,
sheep.
but I don't think you're a black sheep.
Psychedelic sheep works for me. Yeah, nice little, transcendental sheep is fine. That's great. Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's the way to go.
I wanted to be a witch when I was a kid, so I think I kind of achieved some of that actually.
That's actually where, so my grandmother again grew up in Taos, and they had all these little cultural names for themselves, right? That my grandpa came from the Cebolleros and in Llano, and then there were the Chaqueros and Ranchos the Taos, and my grandma came from Talpa Taos, where the Brujas
Ah,
were.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And so she just scared everyone
Oh, I
immediately,
like
where they
it.
were like, oh, self-identifying as a witch is the way to go as well.
Well, when I was 29, this has nothing to do with psychedelics. When I was 29, I spent a winter in Taos working on the mountain. And because I thought,
Amazing.
well, I've never been a ski bum. And I had this theory that if I was 30 and doing that would just be sort of, lame. Because then I was like, okay, well, and so I thought, well,
Not
this
at
is my
all.
last year to do this. So at 29, I moved to Taos for the winter with my Fiat convertible
Perfect. Perfect weather,
And
weatherizing.
my skis would just barely fit, diagonally in the car. And I drove from California to Taos, spent the winter working on the mountain. And if the weather was nice, I drove the car up and picked up people at I know it's not a blinking light anymore, but it used to be a blinking
Right.
light, the
Blinking
only
yellow light.
stoplight.
Yep.
And I would pick up people and drive them up the mountain. And then if it was snowing, I would leave my car at the blinking light and hitch up the mountain.
Yep. I feel like that's still being done today.
Oh
So,
yeah,
yeah.
definitely, definitely.
It's just not
It's
blinking. It's a
right. It's
proper
not.
intersection.
It's
Yeah.
a fixed light. That happened a while ago, and I was very sad to see that because that's
So true.
progress.
Right. Right.
All right, I do want. Well,
Yep.
we're not on the topic of psychedelics. I want to talk about the egg. You have an egg patent. I don't. I've never spoken to anybody who has an egg patent. Can you tell me about that?
This is such a sidebar. I used to be an ostrich farmer and became obsessed with eggs. When you can take this thing and then put a little heat on it, and now it's an animal. That's just science and magic. And so,
Both science and
both
magic.
science and magic. Exactly. Put some heat, becomes an animal. Put some heat in the other way, becomes food. And so, yeah, became really obsessed with the anatomy of an egg. Got really interested as eggs as a host for probiotic activity, and thus began my sort of journey in that space of biosciences and interactions of amino acids, proteins, etc. So the egg is an incredible source of protein and probiotic activity, much like yogurt. So I am in the entrepreneurial space of trying to bring that into the food economy, and further, looking at precision fermentation, as it were. And so, yeah, it's a it's my side hustle. It's my
I'm
side hustle,
impressed.
Carla.
I'm impressed.
If you ever want to talk about birds and eggs, that's a whole other podcast. But
All
yes,
right. Okay. Okay. Well,
lots to say. Lots to say.
still, that is, I don't know about anybody who has a patent. So just that right there,
Thank you. And again,
very impressive.
thank you, New Mexico scientific community, highest per capita PhDs in the world and in our backyard. So,
Oh wow! I thought the
it's
Research
a
Triangle Park was that in
that's
North
in
Carolina.
Oh, nope, it's Los Alamos County,
Oh,
and that's borders our district. So yes, we
yep.
and many Los Alomosians live in Santa Fe. So yes,
Yes.
yes, and
All right, back to psychedelics. So, do you think psychedelic medicine is asking us to redefine power itself, like away from domination and toward relationship?
gosh, I hope so. Isn't that the dream, right?
It's my dream,
I,
yes.
I mean, it's healing it's creating bipartisanship. It's breaking down barriers politically that I will continue to embrace, where we're seeing, it really healing our political culture in a lot of ways, where we can come together on such a deep level of we need this healing, we need this available. What else can it also accomplish? And I firmly believe that as more folks get into the practice of using psychedelics in that way, that we will continue to see a greater form of relationship, a deeper level of conversation. And yeah, I'm very hopeful for all of that. When, we have started in so many different spaces and having that conversation more directly and breaking these molds that we've created in our societies that have been very like shut down and cut off from that. So I think that's the only the only way is optimism for this, especially because it has been so resonant and so supportive of changing these and shifting these paradigms that have been so deeply entrenched in what we're trying to break down. That yeah, let's go. We've got it. We've got to.
Okay, so here's a future focused question. So, if the divine feminine were fully expressed in public policy,
Oh
what would
gosh.
let's think for a second. What would psychedelic legislation look like 10 years from now?
Wow. Whew. I think it's going to be interesting to see how we deal with and continue to talk about our criminal justice system, right, which is the form of government that we deal with. And I think it starts there. If the divine feminine is going to have its real impact is how we work through justice first, and then the rest, right? At least this is my hope, that it starts in a way of how do we create the empathy that needs to be there in the way in which we treat the most vulnerable in our society, where the government is literally fully in charge and charged with dealing with these situations, these lived situations, taking that and being able to create, sort of in the image of the divine feminine, a way of healing and a way of building sort of the failed parts of our society that have failed the folks that end up in the systems of justice that are needed, um, to really help heal and transform. So if we can start there, that is a true vision for me that I think can be transformative at every level of government. And I think it's been there in so many ways in New Mexico, in the early childhood space, in the way in which we're providing now childcare for everybody
Yeah,
universally. That's the
amazing.
divine feminine,
That is.
like that's
Absolutely.
women in politics,
Yes. Yes.
solving for the needs of
Yes.
our community, our families.
Yeah.
And so I think as we continue to see that take place, and women being present in these places of power, that we will continue to see this transformation. And for me, it's how do we support the most vulnerable that the government is charged with helping and supporting, where we've had these failures in our society, and seeing if we can do that first.
Well, may that be so.
I
All
hope
of that.
so. I keep
Well,
working at
I
it.
know you are. And thank you for that.
Of
Andrea,
course.
thank you for coming on Psychedelic Divas. Thank you for your time and your wisdom. Will you do me a favor? Will you promise to come back after you have had your first legal
Yes.
psychedelic experience through the New Mexico system that you have made
2027.
possible?
2027. That's a perfect timing. We're at the end
Uh,
of this year. It'll be right around this time. And yeah,
Okay. All right.
there
So
we
you can
go.
come back and you'll give us a report from the field about your
Great.
first experience and how the whole thing is going.
Love that.
All right.
Love
Great.
that. Yes,
Well,
let's do it.
okay. Perfect.
Mark the calendar.
Can you let our listeners know the best way to reach you and support you? Because I know fundraising is
Oh,
a big deal for all politicians.
yes. And we're in a re-election year,
Yeah.
2026.
Yep.
Go midterms. Yeah. AndreaRomero.com. Easiest way to find me. I'm Googleable. I will come up, although there are millions of us in the world, and Andrea Romero's. It's so fun to see my tocayas around the world doing cool things. But I'm the politician from New Mexico. And so really easy to find me. Yeah.
Cool.
That's it.
She's the
Andrea at
representative for
Andrea
Santa
Romero there.
Fe
Yeah.
and Espanola also, like north. You're Santa Fe and north,
Yeah,
or
Espanola for Indigenous communities,
uh-huh.
Powhatan, Tesuque, Nambe, and San Ildefonso Pueblos,
Mm,
and the city of Santa Fe. That's us.
beautiful.
Yeah.
One of well, Towson in Mexico and Santa Fe, I've always taken as my second home. In fact, I tried to buy property there a long time ago, and I was like, well, I'm not quite sure. It was before Airbnb. Couldn't figure out how to like property manage it from California or how I was going to do it, but it has been my heart state next to California. So
Oh,
I
well,
look forward
we
to.
love having you, Carla. It was so
I always
amazing.
come back. So yes, I
Good,
will be
good,
back.
good, 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 good. Well, I can't wait to see you. Do let me know when you're in town and we
I
can grab
will.
a coffee.
Good.
And
Perfect.
it's lovely to see you.
I so appreciate it,
Yeah,
and thank you for taking. I know you're on vacation right now, so thank you for taking the time to
of course.
sit with us. And I want to thank you all for listening and for being on this growth journey together. And if you have a moment, it would be ever so awesome to have you click the 5 stars or give this a thumbs up wherever you're listening. We need to feed the always hungry algorithm gods, and just those little gestures make a difference. So thank you. Wishing everyone a beautiful, peaceful, and highly psychedelic 2026. Thank you, Andrea, and thank you all
Thank
for
you,
being
Carla.
on this journey together. Bye bye.